We're going to start with college football. Some of the big games coming up this weekend. Oklahoma State, the Cowboys taking on the University of Texas. The Longhorns, obviously coming off a tough loss in the Red River rivalry, and how they're going to be able to respond. Will Stark have his guys back and be ready to go? Can Casey Thompson bounce back from that? Can Bijan Robinson put together another impressive game? They had a great plan. They came out there and played well and looked good for the most part. And you could argue should have won that game. Not a ton of defense ultimately being played. Couldn't get the stops when they needed to, but started incredibly fast. And the Texas team is playing a lot better than I expected them to right now. I didn't think Stark would have them kind of turned around this quick, this fast. And everyone looked at that loss to Arkansas early in the season, me being one of them, as kind of an indictment on them. And, maybe it's a little bit of indictment on the whole Big 12. I don't know as far as where everybody's at with quality of opponents. But I do know that Texas ramped up their game. They played really well against Oklahoma. Just couldn't get it done down the stretch. And they're going to be taking on a Cowboys team that isn't your typical Mike Gundy team. They're not throwing it all over the place. They're one of the better teams in college football, on defense this year. Their scoring defense has been pretty darn good, and that's what's been leading the way. You probably don't know a whole lot about them because they're not a very highlightable team because they don't have those big-time plays. They don't have those elite players at the wide receiver position that we've become so accustomed to seeing, and a quarterback that's throwing for 450 yards seemingly every game. There's no Chuba Hubbard running around back there and making these big plays. Like, their offense is a little bit void of some of that elite talent, but this is still an Oklahoma State team that is not going to be messed with. And I think part of the thing with Texas, it's going to be interesting to watch them early to see how they come out and play. How do you respond after a difficult emotional loss in a big time rivalry game? And that's something that Sark's going to have to deal with now. This Texas program isn't accustomed to winning. They're not accustomed, to these big time games. And, and you could argue maybe they are accustomed to the disappointment, but can they bounce back and can they still, contend in the Big 12? I think they can. I think I was a little bit premature on them to write them off early, but I think the tail of the tape will begin early on, and you'll be able to see how emotionally charged this Texas team is. Playing at home, I think, helps. Hopefully they'll have, packed house and Longhorn Nation behind them, and that should help their players kind of step up. But they're going to have to get a big game from Bijan Robinson, to help kind of steady that thing on the ground and get everything going. They're 5.5-point favorites. Personally, I think that sounds about right. If they start with emotion and they're able to play hard and they're not coming off, a letdown game, then I think that they cover that 5.5. If they start slow, I think Oklahoma State might be able to control the tempo and get after them a little bit on the defensive side. So you got that. We'll travel to the SEC, where I think the next two best games in college football are this week. You've got the Auburn Tigers falling out of the rankings after losing to Georgia. And frankly, I was very disappointed that, they played the run fairly well early on. They just got worn out, but this Auburn offense is not very good. They're not very good. And it begins to catch up with their defense when they can't convert first downs. It wears you down as a defensive player when you're on the field so much. So as they take on Arkansas, who's coming off, an emotional loss, a tough one to Ole Miss after they lost to Georgia, the week before. I don't know exactly how they'll respond either. Now, I have a lot more confidence in Arkansas, KJ Jefferson leading the charge and being able, to run the show than I would Bo Nix or whoever they potentially have playing quarterback at Auburn. And so I think they're 4.5-point favorites. It's at home. That sounds about right. I believe a lot more in Arkansas, and I'll put that Georgia game from 2 weeks ago in a little box and bury it and say, you know what? They just got out of their skis early in the game. Georgia overwhelmed them, and then it was over. Against Ole Miss, I think that was a lot more indicative of the type of team that we'll see. I think they'll bounce back. A couple of tough losses, but I like Pittman as their coach. He'll steady the ship. He'll be the guy, I think, that'll be able to get them emotionally up for the game and be ready to go after coming off a couple of tough losses. But I like the favorite of this one too. Arkansas laying 4.5. Like I said, it's at home, and when you're coming off emotional defeats, I think that matters a lot. The last game, is another one that resides in the SEC that I don't know if anybody really had circled on their calendar to start the season, unless you were part of Big Blue Nation. You have the number 11 Kentucky Wildcats heading between the hedges to take on the Georgia Bulldogs, who are now ranked first in the country. I thought Bama was the most complete team. They were checking all the boxes. I continue to sit here and say Georgia can't throw the ball, and I don't think they can. And curious to see Stetson Bennett, JT Daniels, how these guys come out and play, who plays, what it's going to ultimately look like. But Kentucky has a defense, and I've said this, I know, now multiple weeks. Mark Stoops has done a good job with that defense. Their offense is finally coming along because they've got Will Levis, the transfer quarterback, who comes in, who doesn't play great, but he plays efficient football, keeps the chains moving, and they've finally been able to pair up an efficient offense with a defense that's been slowly building, and starting to become, I don't know if I'd call it elite, but really, really good in the SEC. Mark Stoops will have a game plan to stop that rushing attack of Georgia. Now, whether or not they're able to do it, I've said, if someone can, I want to see Georgia throw the ball. I think Mark Stoops is as equipped to do it as anybody that he's going to face outside of Nick Saban in the SEC. He's a really smart defensive mind on that side of the ball. And they have talent over there that I think will be able to slow it down. You know what? Sell out to stop the run, force Georgia to beat you over the top. I haven't seen them do that consistently. The line is 23 and a half, 23. I've seen it bounce to 24. It's moved a little bit. Who knows what it'll be ultimately at kick. I think some late money will come in on Kentucky in this one. Everyone loves Georgia because they're number one, and they've just been steamrolling people with that running attack. I don't know if Kentucky can pull the upset, but I do think they can keep it close. This sounds a lot more like a 10-11, maybe 14-point game. And so if you're going to give me 3 touchdowns and change, I'm going to take those points all day long because I like Kentucky as a football team. I think I don't know if they're officially able to challenge in the SEC East, but it wouldn't surprise me if they finish second. They've already taken care of Georgia. This is their really next big test in Georgia. And heaven forbid if they win this game, they will be in the driver's seat for the SEC East. Now, not that that's going to happen, but should they do it, all pandemonium would be breaking out in the SEC East, as this looks like the year now that everybody's thinking maybe Kirby Smart could have his chance to kick the door in and get it done.